Hello. Firstly, do not worry. The story of Amber 1 marches on, but as some of you already know, recently I've been in a bit of a rough shape. So as there is no huge pressure, and revenge will get made sooner or later anyways, I felt it was healthy to relax and make a more easygoing video in the interim. Because the only thing worse than stressing about how to get a video done is stressing over the videos you have piling up mentally afterwards. So having said that, I felt it would be good to pursue these videos kind of in between. Now I personally like to take a break and come back to things much later. It helps really with a lot of perspective. So now, after a good long while, after many months, let's get to the subject of the first special series that I ever did, Ace Combat 7. And now, namely, its DLC. First off, do I still feel the same way about 7? Yes. Pretty much for the most part, I'm about as strongly displeased with its results as before, albeit in a more calm manner now. But the DLC is what we are here to talk about. Now, if you think I was going to talk about the skin DLC, sorry, they're cool. Yeah, that's kind of that. Now, before I get to Kooky Captain Count's creepy caper, I thought it would be fun for both me and you if I touch on the mechanical designs and the DLC planes. Because ironically, despite making something like, 5 hours of me talking about Ace Combat, I actually kind of never really went in super deep on any of the mechanical designs, weirdly. First up is the ADF Family. I think the ADF series is really the kind of go-to heart of Ace Combat's identity in a funny way. Ace Combat was born from the Jet Macross Top Gun craze of the late 80s and early 90s. And nowhere is that really more obvious than in the inclusion of the original ADF, the Falcon, and Ace Combat 2. I mean, think about it. Why does a game centering on a coup d'etat force versus mercenaries have a super tech jet? But Belka, shut up. I don't really care about that lore reasoning. It works, but it's the less interesting answer. The reality is Ace Combat is a jet adventure, and the Falcon is basically a one-to-one child of Macross Plus's sleek variable fighters with their forward-swept wings and futuristic fuselages. Its role in Ace Combat 2 is basically also that of the X9 Ghost from Plus, an inhuman, super maneuverable nemesis. The Ghost and the Falcon both represent something simple: humans fighting the limitations of their ability to master the machine that is the airplane. It is the enemy of the machine itself, always threatening to be a bit further, to exceed human ability and to be lost, to take away the freedom of flight from humans and strand them in a world, isolated, killing for us, but where flight has ultimately abandoned us. Everything about the original Falcon is this, from its shape to the obviously distinct freaky camera eyes. Now that all being said, I think Ace Combat 5's Falcon is kind of inferior, and the reason, dear viewers, is angles. The ADF-01 manned version is just a nervous hummingbird to the original's expressive future swan. The sacrifices made to change and accommodate the Gundam panoramic cockpit, the long pointy nose and bulging engine nacelles and mouth laser have essentially skewed a lot of the body geometry to the point that it feels, well, like a nervous hummingbird. And now I'm not going to nitpick aerodynamics on the Falcon too much. It's clearly a future jet. But the big front opening laser always felt kinda wrong in my gut. Like opening a big flat edge-on surface to wind flow. Now, having said that though, I will compliment the Project Aces designers for designing and including in the 7 version the air intakes on the side of the laser unit. It's very cool. It kind of shows that there's some kind of thought being put into the machine and how it would operate. Too bad by default that all lasers in 7 are nerfed. Now the ADF-01 is still fine. It's still a well-polished design, and the DLC version looks fantastic. You'll be right at home shooting at Easter Island Moais as they fire ripples back at it. But if you put it next to the original Falcon, yeah, sorry, that thing is tight. Now this is something neat, and an always fun mechanical design challenge. Design a machine that looks like a predecessor to another actual machine. The Morgan here is a real slam dunk. All the shared body geometry is there, but with some fun little details that really make it an obvious predecessor, and kind of a bridge from a more contemporary jet. I love the little details like the Hornet-style positioned gun on the nose, the little struts hefting this huge, big experimental laser cannon, and these big experimental bombs. It really feels like a world with no boundaries, or Belka said, shit, slap all the stuff onto the thing. And no, I don't care that the player model is technically a spin-off thing or whatever. That's just a special weapon excuse anyhow. Overall, it's a big thumbs up. And I think the thing that really seals the deal is the white, black, and orangey highlight of a kind of NASA prototype with Pixie's own personalization. Instead of going for camo or Air Force gray, it really expresses more of this kind of prototypical machine look instead. Oh, and the big rear dual landing gear is a fun detail. Like, yeah, this thing is hauling 2 purses in a backpack. It's a big fat lad. Too bad the burst missiles kinda suck. The fact that it gains handling at higher speed also gives it a little bit of a mechanical distinction from the usual super maneuverable jet that shows up in 7. Hey Mr. Horse, what do you think?
No sir, I didn't like it.
The Raven just feels like the weakest link in the ADF family. Its biggest problems are really ironically the same problems of AC7. Over-reliance on callbacks of poor quality, bloat, confusion, and a mess of direction. You think I'm being vague, you think I'm using weird metaphorical art terms. So here, let me show you. Callbacks. By the point we are at now, the Raven that we have is basically the 4th entry into the Falcon family tree, or maybe 5th, depending how you cut it. The OG, the Hummingbird, the Morgan, and the neglected Omega Hummingbird, the Adler. Fundamentally, all of these have played around and made some shift on the inherent design. But by the Raven, we're kind of left with another spiky, super maneuverable, camera eye, laser beam mouth AI plane. Most of these design elements just are not that novel anymore, especially when compared to previous designs which did them individually stronger. Hell, even the AC5 Falcon did the open mouth thing better because at least it did not always have an open mouth. Bloat. I mean, Jesus, would you look at the size of it? What are they feeding it, whole roast hams? And this thing is supposed to be super maneuverable Macross jet? But Argenbolt, it's big because it splits into drone. Yeah, but, well, actually, and well, mechanical design-wise, the drone is an entirely separate plane. Also, most of the girth is in the huge body, not the drone area, so I don't know. The drone concept is neat, but it's also like, in terms of actual gameplay for the player, not there. The Raven is just another Falcon, but bigger, and you get a UAV. Confusion. This is mainly the weird double-decker thing going on here. Now, when it's done right, I'ma love me some big super crazy biplane jet stealth boxwing jazz. And I also love me some crazy angle segmentation jazz also. But here, it just feels like a big triangular bird head grafted onto a plane. Or like the plane is wearing a big tricorn hat. And so yeah, it's kind of a mess of directions. I just don't know what the deal with this thing is. By IRL logic, it's just pretty no bueno, but like, hey, okay, it's a future jet in a mecha anime jet game. That IRL logic's not too important. But at the same time, I look at it, and we still have food at home, but also Carl's Jr. is better than Burger King. Congratulations, it's finally back. Finally, the dream ride. Yeah, the XFA-27 is pretty much the mechanical representation of the superego of PA at the time of the late 90s. Fuck all that boring-ass stealth 6th gen pancake shit. Variable geometry F-14, wahoo! Remember, like actually just a few minutes ago when I said, Ace Combat was born from the jet Macross Top Gun craze of the late 80s and early 90s. Well, look at it. Friggin' look at it. That's it. The additional special missiles are killer, and the maneuverability actually feels appropriate to this kind of nutso razor-winged Star Fox jet. It's sleek and killer, and it wears its inspiration and dreams and hopes on its sleeves. Also, the floor window is cool, but it always kind of makes me think of the Stuka for some reason. Blech. This thing is a flying identity crisis conceptually. It seems so weirdly ironic for a series which nailed the Kawamori-esque Macross Plus look to then actually get Kawamori to design a jet, only for that jet to end up with, well, just him designing the thing. Now for the layman, this thing might seem kinda okay. They might dislike the oddity of the top intake, but for me, the issue here is really derived from just what exactly this thing is. Okay, so up until now we've established basically a big thing. For a long time and in many entries, the ideal Ace Combat jet is a lot like the ideal Macross jet for the most part. A fun, dogfighting, super future, arcade game feeling, Macross Plus, variable geometry, forward swept wing, canards jet. And yes, the Wyvern is also an expression of this, hence the crazy wing shindigs. Now in real life, however, the future of jets has moved into a long-range, BVR, stealthed, short takeoff or VTOL maybe, data link using, gray, vortex, rhomboid fuckery pancake. You can see here the tension. One is our ideal fantasy, and one is our brutal efficient reality, right? Okay, so now the Shinden comes in and it's basically this awkward car crash of Kawamori. The daddy of Macross Super Forward Swept Wing Land trying to make a ladder category of design, trying to make an F-35 thing. It's a forward swept canard variable geometry Macross plane being blended with an F-35, and the result is a really, really awkward plane. Now here, I could mention technical actual aerodynamic details about how the top intake would have choking problems at high angles of attack, or how the canards and so on would have awful radar returns and basically really decrease the plane's stealth. But that's all IRL technical logic. What is really happening here is my IRL side of the brain and my anime mecha Macross side of my brain are trying to navigate the design logic of a really identity crisis ridden design. Okay, my brain says it has a top intake because it wants short takeoff and variable nozzle landing thing. But then why not one bigger main engine like the F-35? No, bad. It's supposed to be cool. Don't worry about science. But then why the big awkward intake slapped onto the back behind the cockpit? It just breaks up the fuselage and makes the form seem cluttered. Why does he do this with his newer designs? No, Kawamori said he was designing for a kind of IRL Japan custom F-35 or what? It just frazzles me because I know both design logics of IRL, science and aerodynamics and all that stuff, and I also know like cool mechanical design, jet plane go zoom. But both just don't seem to land on this thing. It feels like your old forward swept wing dad really trying to fit into a modern radar absorbing pair of gray stealth chinos. It's just kind of awkward. Okay, Argenbolt, we get it. It's not possible to marry the modern 5th, 6th gen design ideas to the cool world of Strange Reel. It's just a recipe for disaster. Whoa, now, hold on there, cause it's goddamn time for... Yeah, okay, so I gotta admit, the Nosferatu has a special place in my heart. Ace Combat 6 was my first Ace Combat, and the Nosferatu was my first super duper jet. But that being said, what I really want to mention is the design itself. The Nosferatu aesthetically really is, in essence, one of the only a handful of Ace Combat originals that nail the look and feel of a potential 6th gen fighter, along with the XFA-36 game from Ace Combat 3. Now for those of you who do not know, fighters are categorized based on generations. These generations are usually marked out by a general set of features they will, or we think they will have. Now, fighter generations are all kind of iffy at best, but here, the Nosferatu is a beauty because it overcomes the challenges of both being, yes, a cool Ace Combat future jet, while also expressing some of those concepts. Drone control, smaller, more accurate weapons like the micro-missiles, radar signature reduced intakes, big modular payload base, and it's flattened but still sleek, still canard having cool design. It manages to really nail the balance. And also, I kinda love that it has shitty stability and stalls out a lot. It feels cool to have a superjet with some actual weakness instead of just another S-rank everything Galaxian jet every single damn time. It kind of adds a bit of personality. Now Strange Reel is a weirdo, cool mix of both our world and a cooler jet fantasy world. and I think the Nosferatu really nails walking that fine line, where so many other fictional jets just decide to either leap over it, or if they're the Shinden, balls themselves on the border. Phew! And with all that mechanical design and jet talk out of the way, let's get to the meat of Ace Combat 7's DLC. Dude, where's my sub? Or, fumbling the nuclear football at the 10-yard line. A big, high-stakes caper about a submarine. Is PA trying to suck up to me? And said story focusing on a methodical and insane submariner? This individual who executes a months-long plan to end up nuking Osea? Ha! Now that would be way out there. Anyway, first things first. B to B+ to just all the writing all around. The swap from Katabuchi to more kind of seasoned Project Ace's staff, even if they were originally level designers and the like, really did kind of end up creating a focused, self-contained story pivoting around a good central villain that all came together quite well. If I would rate Ace Combat 7 as a whole, it's kind of a C- to D writing effort. It's just a mess. This single 3-part DLC, however, bounces way the fuck up, back to easily maybe even above Ace Combat 5 at really the best of its times. It's not really gonna touch 4's simplicity, and it's not gonna come close to 0 or 3 for, real meaty story depth, but it's definitely above average for this series for sure. Even characters who are a mess in the campaign feel focused and better refined here all around. Now in part, you can easily say that's because, well, it was written afterwards, but at times it really feels like a weird theatrical movie that somehow came out better than the TV show it was based on. Now all that being said, it's still at best a B+, and there's still some rough moments, and a bit of drama/edge that sort of makes me go, eh? Let's get into things with... Starting off, we begin with what ends up being our wraparound story of David North. Using an analyst dude pretty much tips us off right away. We're doing another Clancy-style kind of Red October thing. Now, Ace Combat 5 tried to be the sum of all fears and failed, but thankfully the Alicorn story here ends up mostly better. David's surrounding plotline stuff in general feels kind of weirdly additional. Like in Red October's case, Jack Ryan's entire arc is tied into and around the central story. That being, what if Big Boat Danger defect do? Here though, it's a kind of questionable, just how it mostly focuses on one of these big kind of go nowhere plot moral question things that the DLC sets up. Namely, David's investigation into looking whether Trigger would someday become another Torres. Will Special Ace Man become a bad guy? We already kind of know the answer is no. Top aces become bad guys? No, top aces become good guys. And if they're Mobius, they can't stop being fucking good guys. Even Nemo, in his Corpo Nightmare Corp War future, is kind of just morally gray. A morally gray agent in a morally gray world. Often not the worst, but just maybe someone who doesn't prevent the worst from happening sometimes. Cypher potentially was a dick, but the Belkin War was also a shit show, so it wasn't really anything that happened afterwards. Getting back to Trigger, ironically, we already know he will be praised as the second coming of Jet Jesus by the end of 7, and also know he already did his worst shit possible in the attack on Shilage. No need to wait for retirement. AC aces are kind of morally grayest or shittiest during their wars, but this also kind of misses because Torres' fame, and the comparison in the first place, was in being good at damage control on a battleship and then a nuclear submarine, not really being a force of death jet ace power. So I will say I can see the parallel they were trying to go for here. I just don't think it really adds much beyond a very nebulous, there is a guy who if you are with you will live maybe thing. David, I think, works best when he exposits in and around the Alicorn's main plot, I feel. And so we move on mechanically to the fight. Largely, DLC 1 feels like a big apology to the fans. Yes, we're sorry we never really had a good, meaty, big air dogfight. Hey, Ace Combat 6's ECM was a cool idea. Maybe if we broke down a battle into smaller operations, that could be a thing. This all feels like positive steps in the right direction, really, in terms of designing a bigger combat level with some depth in its execution. Sadly, I do kinda wish the moment-to-moment flight model gameplay was still deeper, but the DLC ain't gonna change that in a game, really. Then the twins show up. The Ace Squadron, quote, addition of these two characters is something I'm still really 50-50 over. On the one hand, like, okay, sure, cool. A custom Ace Squadron for the DLC. Great. And general resources, neat. This is kind of integrating the time they start really moving into Usia, and they were directly the ones who sold and scrapped the Alicorn from Yuktobania to Erusia. That's all really cool. But as for the characters themselves, I'm just kind of Like, listen, it's not even that they're crazy Hot Topic twins per se. I watch Mecha. I'm very well familiar with the weird concept of, like, the mentally unstable ace pilot / twin pilots and their unique machines. More so, I just don't know why this weird Hot Topic personality thing was chosen. Why is it crazy twin edgelords? The choice does not so much feel wrong, just not particularly right either. It's kind of like the Cowboy Glamrock Squadron, the weird suicidal bunch of phantom pilots, except the twins get way more plot focus. We already get this weirdly Gundam seedy feeling of just suicidally deranged pilots in the DLC, and this really kind of just exemplifies it. I don't know, I can't say it's against the rules or anything that you can't characterize something this way, but where the Ace Squadrons at their best in something like Zero express the ideas of the plot, here they're just sort of insane twins, because they are. They babble around some concepts, but nothing really concrete. And I kind of have one idea around why that is, but I kind of have to leave that for the end. For now, you defeat them kind of weirdly easily in their first encounter, pop some more endlessly spawning jets, and then you get a big finale. Torres here makes what is the first of what seems to be a long list of big brain moves, so we might as well start talking about him. He launches the insane Sax Squadron decoys and then escapes in the confusion. Captain Bird of the bird ship of Osia is then kind of picked off, and you kind of tell that there might be some kind of conspiracy going on. The late arrival of the ECM planes in particular also kind of points to this, as well as the fact the Alicorn was an attempted capture operation and not an attack. From what we see right now, it feels like Torres basically set up a situation where he could use the battle between the sides to duck out, declaring himself independent, making his actions separate from Erusia. And that kind of wraps up DLC 1. It's a good setup, and it leaves on high stakes. Oh, and one final ironic note of something I noticed. Around the corner from the Alicorn is an Udaloy Russian anti-sub destroyer. This is just kind of ironic to me personally as a sub-sim fan. Udaloys are a real pain in the ass. Anchorhead Raid is by far the strongest act and the middle act of his story. Right off the bat, mechanically it's really neat. Torres does neat stuff, and whereas DLC 1 reused the port, it was mostly an air battle and as such did not really tie into the action all that much. Here, the reuse of the Anchorhead map during the day marks a fun series callback, but also a good level setup. Do you go left and hit the port's drone containers before they launch, or do you go right and destroy the ships before their defenses come online? That, combined with the multitude of return lines, makes this really feel like the ghost of Ace Combat 6 is tiptoeing around somewhere. As well, more enemies roll in as the mission continues, and you have these nice little extra Space Invader bonus targets, and the Ospreys taking off. The main reason I say it's the strongest act is because it's also seems to be the smartest. To understand why, let me explain what I think has happened here. Torres, an insane naval captain, survived 6 months on a leaky boat, trying just to stay afloat. His loyal surviving crew from then have become his agents, and he has used his charisma to set up a network inside the Erusian Navy, all to execute his plan. The network has basically come in and contacted General Clemens, an Osean officer who is desiring promotion. He in turn has been manipulated. He now hates Trigger and sees this as a kind of route to that promotion, and tries to convince High Command Trigger is a threat. Maybe down the whole oopsie Harleen incident at the ISEV, using that as evidence. What this ultimately builds to, however, is Clemens setting up an insane operation where you, the player, and a handful of other pilots are sent up against a huge chunk of the Erusian Navy at Anchorhead, basically on a suicide mission. But instead, Trigger makes it go kablamo, and also ices the same Erusian naval staff who would have otherwise coordinated later efforts. This would also be the Navy that would have hunted Torres down later on. At this point, Torres is playing some fucking 4D TNG chess with his plot and its setup. Torres shows up and starts using the Alicorn's burst railgun munitions to really fuck with Trigger. He nabs his nukems and seems like a genius. Oh, and you fight the twins again and they go kablooey, but we'll get back to them at the end again, like I said. Anchorhead just has a juicy plot with good interwoven story bits in the intro, briefing, and dialogue, and now Torres is all set up for his final act. It wraps on even higher stakes and a big dramatic conclusion. We've essentially helped him in his plan, and now Torres has the bomb for, well, his final go. And this is where I think things I feel start to fray and mostly come apart, though not disastrously so. Mechanically, 10 million relief plan is, well, an interesting setup. However, it's a narrow mechanical sequence of hoops to jump through before something of a specific boss fight. Now you can bring good anti-surface weapons and be a bit peeved by the air units, or bring a lot of air weapons and, have to do more work later on the actual submarine. Really, hybrid planes with hybrid weapons do the best, like the totally not normal missiles on the Rafale or XFA-27. The air units here I do feel are kind of a royal pain. The SAX units are 3 hits, which is frustrating alone, and then on top of that, the sub-launched UAVs have the high godlike ability to turn ever so tighter than the turn radius of the base game's dumb as doornails tail pursuit missiles you can fire at them. The Alicorn itself is also kind of in a weird spot of being a sub-boss fight in the Ace Combat series. These tend to not always play out super well or in depth. For the Faxies, for example, it's either a simple enough scripted encounter with some timed accents, or a timed ascent setup with some waiting between surfacing. Here, the Alicorn ironically has more interesting moves if you let it live long enough to show them. If you nuke it too fast, you might not even see the energy flying saucers launch. I can't say it's terrible. It has things happening for sure. There's a lot going on. It's just not ultimately all that layered or deep in the actual fight. Then we get to the fake out by Torres and the big climax, the final attack of the Alicorn, most of which plays out in a fairly straight line A to B. And okay, now I know you're thinking there, Mr. Archenbald, Mr. Subman, you love subs. What do you think of the Alicorn? It's pretty cool, right? Not for me. The Alicorn it's not really a sub, it's a carrier battleship which can sink. I mean, for God's sake, it don't even have torpedo tubes. Whoever wrote that shit needs to be splashed with water and probably given a copy of H.L. Sutton's sub-books. And you can give it all the triple hulls and twin-screw X-planes it wants. That giant awkward flight deck and open hangar is just whack. It just screams pressure hull issues at me. At the end of the day, it's not really the Red October, it's more like the Blue Noah. So with that out of the way, let's get to the big point here. So first off, I hate the fucking last speech from David. It's way too long and way too self-masturbatory. But mainly, I gotta ask, what happened to Torres? The main issue with the last act here, and DLC 3, is pretty much that all of that Machiavellian setup from Anchorhead Raid, it's now weirdly missing. It just isn't there anymore. Torres is now he's just crazy and evil. It's disappointing because of what seemingly was set up but then ended up flattening out. So let's talk about the Torres Problem. This pops up explicitly in one of the mission briefings, and in general, we see a consistent theme of questions of utilitarianism, specifically the Trolley Problem. Now, for those who don't know, the idea and kind of the moral question of utilitarianism is, should a small group suffer if it means the majority go free or escape? This whole deal was amazingly encapsulated in a submarine movie rebranded with spaceships called Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. For you non-nerds, Spock is an elf. His race likes logic. He is utilitarian and totally thinks, yeah, sometimes a few people really gotta suck if it really means that most people make it. His friend Tiberius is a human who disagrees. He really does not like utilitarian thought and is an individualist instead. In fact, Tiberius hates utilitarianism so much, at space school, they have a test. The test is save another spaceship, or save your own. You cannot save both. And wouldn't you know it, Tiberius cheats the test and breaks it rather than make that hard decision. Spock the elf does not like this. Thus, at the end of the movie, in order to save the ship, Spock the elf gives his life to fix the main reactor. Tiberius is forced to accept you cannot save everyone without sacrificing someone from time to time. This was pretty much the moral of that movie, the last Star Trek movie after which none were made, and nothing undid any of this. Now, this also goes a bit into history as well. The Soviet first generation of nuclear submarines were not exactly perfect. One in particular, the Hotel Class K19, had a lot of problems. At one point, the reactor cooling system broke, and the captain had to decide to sacrifice some of the engineering crew who would go in and jury-rig a new system out of ventilation parts, allowing the submarine to limp home and avoid a meltdown. In the process, though, this would end up contaminating and killing 22 engineers from radiation poisoning over the next 2 years. So as you can see, subs and trolley problems are weirdly linked and overlapping in more than really any other machine for some reason. All of this is reinforced by the background of Torres, that being someone who was captain of the Alicorn when it had an accident, and then, in a utilitarian fashion, saved a portion of his crew at the cost of sacrificing a few of them. So there I was, seeing the sacks take off at the end of DLC 1 and Torres escape, and I went, oh, I see, he's going to make us choose. But this is just a test run. And then at the end of DLC 2, I was seeing that Torres stole only 2 nukes. That's exactly enough to set up a trolley problem, I think. And then, well, DLC 3 happens, and Tiberius was right. David North tells Torres his plan won't work. Torres seems to know his plan won't work. But then again, Torres' plan also kind of falls apart. It seemed to be devastate Aured, the capital of Osea, during the peace protest victory thing for Ace Combat 4's war, the one Osea did not fight in, but the writers forgot that. And that devastation would then convince Osea to end the war, I guess. Now the logic is weird for a number of reasons. It kind of assumes a nuke blow-up war end, which, no, nuking a city does not magically end a war. It did not work that way in real life. Hell, even the Belkan War ended because the nukes deadlocked Belka against the Allies. They were detonated in a bunch of mountain passes. The cities evaporated were just kind of an unfortunate side effect, not the targets, and not the only thing that stopped the progress of the Allies at the time. But okay, sure, fine, whatever. Nuking the cities is Torres' plan. I can hear you say, aha, now Argynbald will mention how tilting the sub won't actually make it range further. It needed to charge the capacitors of the railgun more. Aha, now Argynbald will mention how the neutron warheads would not even kill that many people to make enough of an impact. But nope, both of those are good technical points, but my main criticism here is just, why is that it, story-wise? Why is Torres shooting a nuke, then another, the crux in the first place? It just seems like a huge missed opportunity. After all this trolley problem talk, all the conclusions and hints, just to flatter Torres with, yeah, Torres was just really crazy and wanted to kill people via nuking them from a railgun. Like, really? That's it? After all this boat has the means to end this war elegantly, yada yada? Like, once more, it's not a bad ending per se, but it's a really simple one. David tells Torres it won't work. Torres fires anyways. Trigger stops both nukes. Torres is bad. David North tells us Trigger is special. The end. Now I know it's annoying for the YouTube reviewers to kind of do this thing, but wouldn't something like Torres fires the first nuke at the fleet, Trigger can destroy it but won't be able to stop the nuke on Aured? Or would maybe vice versa be an option? After all, the buildup of the Poseidon crews talking about sacrificing themselves, or the suicidal Sax planes or so on, or Torres and Clemens willing to sacrifice soldiers. Now we the player could make the hard choice. Or even further, what if Torres had fired both at Aured and for Bonti, one at a time? He's about halfway across the ocean, give or take anyways, and the railgun can be magically Outer Haven and shoot wherever it wants with Rex's gun, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Choose, Trigger, the country who started the war, or the one who kept the war going. Torres' actions in playing both sides so consistently would fit perfectly. I don't know, it would be something, it would be kind of neat. Obviously there's canon problems and, Farbanti still exists later in the campaign, but at the same time it feels like a missed opportunity. Because otherwise, like I said, Tiberius was right. This would be his favorite story. The bad guys die. There's no trolley problem because you can save everyone. Then the narrator sucks your dick about how great you are for 10 minutes straight. But what do I know? I've never launched any nuclear attacks on Osea. And to end off, this leads me to the last weird thing. Self-aware characters. Over the plot, it seems there's one thing driving Mimic Squadron nuts. It feels like it's them hinting that they know they are to be defeated because they're video game bosses. I don't know, it's all kind of innuendo and inference. Torres also makes these weird points about how Trigger is lacking in any real motivation, and it's like he's specifically saying that Trigger, as a vessel for the player, lacks a driving motive, because he's just a vehicle for the self-insertion of the power fantasy. Now maybe someone, maybe on Reddit, would find all this super meta and epic. But let me tell you the big secret. Meta is really cheap. As a great reviewer said recently, it takes actors years to act like their characters and not look at the camera. Method acting, of being the character in the story, not a person on a set, is held in high regard for good reason. So to me, it just fails to give me a worthwhile substitute for actual characterization, all these hints about, maybe we know we're video game characters. And so I know that all sounds quite critical, and so I will reiterate. Overall, the Ace Combat 7 DLC is a big positive step in the right direction. While I'm not 100% sure we're heading towards something on par with, 0 or 3 in terms of story, or 4 or 6 in terms of gameplay, I do have some hope. And as much as the ending and the DLC story flattens out a more interesting, meaty web of narrative, the fact I can even point and offer alternatives means there was at least a good, interesting thing there in the first place, as opposed to the confusing, obtuse mess that 7's main story was. It gives the impression that a lot of that was the product of bad circumstance and arrogant writing, and that it can be readily fixed, even by the same team, just with better preparation and some different people. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this big wrap-up of 7's DLC. I'm not sure how long until AC8 is a thing, but I have some other ideas for videos before then. Next time, however, we will return to the story of Amber 1.